Hey everybody, Module 8 discussion post. So I was assigned Chapter 13, so I'm going to do 2 questions from Chapter 13 and then 1 question from Chapter 14. So for Chapter 13, the first question, so discuss the key components of the propositions regarding employee abuse organizations. So employee abuse organizations, or EAOs, are talked about on starting on page 388 in the text. It's basically the quote there, the definition of it is where counterproductive workplace behaviors are systematically a part of the normal communicative practices that result from the structures within the organization itself. So basically, the company is designed, it's structured to be abusive. So the propositions that the question talks about are summarized on page 389, and there's kind of a summary on in let's see, table 13.3. It lists each one. The first 4 are the conditions that are likely to create an EAO. So abusive discourse being evident in 2 or more message flows, leaders condoning abusive discourse, multiple employees breaching the norm for civil discourse, and the company culture being competitive, individualistic, or aggressive. So those are kind of the 4 things that are red flags and are good indications that it's likely to develop into an EAO. 5, the 5th proposition says it is likely to get worse over time as these things continue to happen and it persists over time, it's likely to become worse. The 6th proposition indicates it will likely negatively impact the stakeholders. So as things continue to degrade and it becomes more and more abusive, the clients will start to see it affect them, the vendors, and other stakeholders in the organization. Number 7 talks about how difficult it is to fix. It takes a really strong commitment from the whole team, as well as from the upper management or the leadership. But it is possible to turn around. It's just really difficult. So these propositions help us to understand how this starts, as well as how it progresses. And also, once it gets started, if leadership doesn't recognize it and correct it early on, it can become systemic. As far as my own experience, I really can't remember being involved in an abusive company so much. The one incident that I can really think about, I had a manager who was somewhat abusive. He was verbally abusive, put people down, really harsh, overly harsh with everybody. But in that case, as soon as I took it to the owner, he did not condone that behavior at all. He had to sit down with me and a couple other employees and the guy that we were having problems with, and he really got it resolved. So in the case that I can remember, our leadership did not condone, and so it didn't develop into this abusive organization. If the owner had been lackadaisical about it, had put it off or not dealt with it directly and head on, it is likely that that would have continued and it would have trickled down into other members of the organization, and then it would have become systemic and been very difficult to fix at a later date. Fortunately, that wasn't the case, and I really hope to never work for a company that is considered one of these abusive organizations. The other question that I chose, what is the relationship between organizational justice and retaliatory behavior? So organizational justice is talked about on page 404. Basically, if I as an employee do not feel that a company is just or fair, that I might retaliate. I might do this in a number of different ways. A few of those options are talked about on page 407. I might damage company equipment. I might, work really slow to, because I'm not trying to help the company, I'm trying to hurt them. I might take long breaks, or even something like not working late when asked to, or calling in sick when I'm not sick. those types of activities would be different actions I could take if I felt that the company wasn't unfair and I want to stick it to the man. So there's different ways that I might come about to feeling that the company is not just or not fair. And these are a few of the different types that are talked about. Distributive justice, which is where I feel like other employees are getting more reward for their risks or the cost that they have to themselves than I am. The example the book gave was if somebody on the ground at an airport, they're out there underneath the airplanes and they have kind of a risky job. And if they felt that they weren't getting rewarded or paid as much as the people that worked inside in the nice air conditioned office, not around the dangerous planes, they may begin to feel that it was unfair because they are being given less reward for their cost than the other people. Procedural justice is another type. So in that situation, resources are not allocated fairly, or decisions are made in a biased way. So if one guy gets to work all the overtime and the other one doesn't, or when I ask for time off, I'm told no, where my coworker just got all his time off when he needed it later in the summer. So if there was treatment or favor given to one employee over another when decisions are being made, that would be a procedural injustice. Interactional justice is a little harder for me to wrap my head around, but as I understand it, if I'm not given respect like others might receive, or because of who I am in the company, I'm not communicated with, honestly, then that might be an interactional justice. So I'm kind of gathering that it's how I'm treated, how I'm respected, and how I'm communicated with on those terms. That would be an interactional justice. If I was treated with less respect than my coworker, then I might feel unfairly towards the company about that. And if I felt unfairly, then I might retaliate as an employee. So an experience that I've had that was along this line, there were, a fairly large team, 10 people that worked in our company, and there were only a couple of us that were asked to work in my department that were asked to work overtime really often, like every week. And there were others in the office that were not asked to work overtime or never volunteered. They weren't asked to work overtime, and they never did. So the way that I see that, that's kind of a procedural injustice. It was biased decisions being made because there were some who could do the work better or who were more willing to, put in some extra time. That it was kind of unfairly asked for the overtime to be worked. And one of my coworkers was just felt overworked, and he really became disgruntled about this. He was frustrated and told me one day that he wasn't going to work any more overtime because it's not fair, and the company doesn't give us anything more because we're putting in the extra work to get these projects done. It's not like we're going to get a raise because we did the overtime, or more benefits or anything else. We're just going to work ourselves into the ground, and it's not going to accomplish anything, and that feels unfair. And so he stopped working extra hours. He stopped coming in early, stopped staying late, and our project load suffered. Because the project load suffered, it had the added benefit of the boss finally decided to hire more people, which is what really needed to happen. But this experience is an example of some procedural and distributive injustice that happened towards a company, and how that employee decided to how to balance the scales or retaliate towards the company. For chapter 14, the one question that I chose, discuss the difference between legitimate information and propaganda. So I found the information about this in the last section of the chapter. The propaganda is talked about on page 442. And basically, propaganda is messages that encourage choice without deliberation. So real informative marketing encourages mindful deliberation. Good informative PR and marketing, advertising should use facts and real information that gives the customer extra information that they might not know that could help them, solve problems or realize that they need this particular thing or service. And so real information focuses on giving the information that somebody needs so that they can make a good decision for themselves with mindful deliberation, as the book calls it. Propaganda, on the other hand, is deceitful, hides information. It's more about just pushing somebody to action. Hey, you need this, and make a decision, get it now. Act now, don't think. And this is something that we see a lot in marketing these days. Interestingly enough, in the statement of ethics and the standards of practice for some of the big associations like the Association of Advertising Agencies and the Public Relations Society, right in their ethics and their standards, they say that it's important to provide truthful and accurate information, to share that information. And so even though it's part of their ethical standards and their codes of conduct, in the marketing world, we see it all the time. They focus on how we might feel with the product, and kind of play on our feelings and our emotions to get us to want something that we may not have wanted otherwise, and probably won't want later on after we've bought it. And this is that's one example of propaganda. And that's all I have for this one. It's going to be a short one, thankfully, because it's already after 10. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.